Good evening. Welcome to our second event for the Global Studies Speaker Series. We're so happy to have all of you from the community and, of course, all of our students here tonight and those here at Marian as well. Normally, Dr. Atlas is here. I'm Holly Grimes. I'm an assistant professor in political science. Unfortunately, Dr. Atlas is traveling this evening. He would have really liked to attend, so he's disappointed he won't get to hear the talk, but he is definitely here in spirit joining us and organized everything this evening for us. This evening, before we get started, I'd like to go ahead and highlight the next event that we'll have in the series. I know some of you were looking for the brochures outside. The next event will be on November 4th, and that's going to be a talk on Germany 30 years after the Berlin Wall, and that'll be a panel discussion. Again, that'll be on November 4th at 7 p.m. here in the Evans Center as well. And so our speaker series is definitely in the spirit of the Franciscan values. Those being peace and justice, good stewardship, peace and reconciliation, and also the dignity of the individual. And so this evening, we would like to ask that we have respect and listen to different views in the spirit and embracing really those Franciscan values. This evening, we'll do our talk first for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then we'll go into questions. The Senator is very happy to answer our questions and take those on for us. And then we'll have a reception with refreshments afterwards by about 8 o'clock. So that's how the evening will run. When you're thinking about the questions that you would like to ask, if you would please think in terms of asking them as questions rather than statements. And there'll be about 30 seconds. This isn't a town hall, it's a discussion. So afterwards, we'll try to make sure that we get everyone's questions and as many individuals a chance to ask questions as well. All right, with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Senator Todd Young to everyone. So Senator Todd Young, he is our U.S. Indiana Senate. He has basically been working on a range of different committees so far. He's on the committee for Finance. He's also on the Committee for Foreign Relations, Commerce, Science and Transportation, and then also Small Business and Entrepreneurship. So he's a fifth-generation Hoosier. He grew up watching his parents work hard to support his family, and he too was doing lots of different jobs as well. So he was delivering newspapers, he mowed yards, and he also did different janitorial tasks for the small family business as well. He went on and went to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. There, he graduated with honors in 1995, and then he took a commission at the United States Marine Corps. And there, he finally was, in 2000, he was honorably discharged, but while he was there, he worked on his MBA while also working as a business consultant, and also his law degree. So by 2010, he decided to run for Congress, and so he has represented Indiana's 9th District for 3 sessions in the House, and then in 2016, he was elected as our U.S. Senate representative for Indiana. Now, Senator Todd Young, too, is married, and in 2005, he married his wife, Jenny. The two of them have run a small law firm in Paoli, Indiana, which actually was started by his wife's great-grandfather, I believe. And so the two of them also are living in Greenwood, Indiana, where they're raising 4 children. They have their son, Tucker, and 3 daughters, Annalise, Abigail, and Ava. And so with that, I would like to thank again Senator Todd Young for coming this evening, and please join me in welcoming him to talk about Indiana and the world.
We turn the mic on here. Can everyone hear me? Well, good evening. Thank you so much, Doctor, for that generous introduction, and it's really my privilege to be here at Marian University, not just because I'm with fellow Hoosiers, not just because this is a great university right here in central Indiana, but also because I have the opportunity to pay tribute by offering these remarks to a great man, Richard G. Lugar. He was a giant in Indiana politics, but really you could make the case a giant in global statecraft. Nearly 2 decades ago, I had a brief opportunity, nearly 2 years, to serve on Senator Lugar's Washington, D.C. staff. And so I had a front row seat into his very important work with respect to many global issues, including his efforts to reduce the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction around the world. Now, times are very different. As I look over a new chapter in America's history, I see challenges and opportunities, both of which I see in abundance. Whether traveling in Washington or traveling around the world, I'm often asked why global events matter to Hoosiers. It's a fair question. It's something I reflect on from time to time. In short, I come back to the same response time and again. Global events matter because the consequences, good and bad, reverberate right here at home. They matter because they affect Hoosiers serving in uniform. They matter because they impact our economy, our workers, our businesses, the price of all the things we buy. They matter because everywhere I go, Hoosiers expect our elected leaders to not just reflect our values, but to carry our values. To carry our values globally and to fight for those values and rights, because we Americans happen to believe our values are universal values. In fact, our country was founded on that very notion. Hoosiers believe that our nation has a moral obligation to engage around the globe, to alleviate suffering, and to help deliver justice. Hoosiers know this is not only consistent with our morality, but it also makes our nation more secure. They know that because we teach this to our grade school children. My children learn that because the United States of America was engaged in the Second World War, we helped keep the world free. In my role on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I have examined the ongoing fighting and resulting humanitarian crisis in Yemen. I'm continuing to speak out against Beijing's crackdown against those seeking to preserve their freedoms in Hong Kong. I'm focused on how to best cool the rising tensions with Iran. There's a lot going on around the world, and there's plenty for a member of the Foreign Relations Committee to work on. We also see the impact of global events in the lives of those seeking refuge right here in central Indiana. I'll continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Burmese Americans who are your neighbors and my neighbors as we work to bring an end to the persecution of minorities in Burma. These points of friction are among America's and Indiana's core interests. I recently had the opportunity, thinking about these interests, to visit the Middle East. 18 years, almost 2 decades after the horrors of September 11th, 2001, our nation continues to grapple with religious extremism and countering the terror threats emanating from Iran and from the lack of stability in places such as Yemen and Afghanistan. With the tensions high, it was very important to get on the ground and hear from our diplomats and our military leaders, to receive firsthand information from key foreign leaders, conversations with the leaders of countries like the United Arab Emirates and Oman and Saudi Arabia, and to receive candid answers to my pointed questions. As recent events around the Gulf demonstrate, there's a great risk that we're facing as a nation, and that risk is that other nations will slip into open conflict. Heated rhetoric and heightened tensions increase the risk of miscalculation on all sides. And they only serve to accelerate the risk, not just to countries in that region, but to our friends, our partners, our allies, and to Americans. A conflict in the Gulf region would have enormous ramifications on the global economy, we know that, and also the security of millions. One country that would be disproportionately impacted should such a conflict occur would be a nation that's already seen such horror in recent years, the country of Yemen, just south of Saudi Arabia. For the millions of Yemeni people on the brink of starvation and who are dealing with the scourge of cholera, a regional conflict would further complicate this humanitarian disaster and traumatize a people that have been through so much. I was pleased when the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia pledged during my visit to provide the $500 million in aid for Yemen that they had already pledged months ago, but now they have finally been making good on that commitment. But further action by those in the region and around the globe is required to end the conflict. In the end, we're going to have to drive the many parties that are fighting with one another to a political settlement. And the United States has an indispensable role to play in ensuring that that happens. So in the Senate, I'll continue to do my part to ensure that these millions are not used as pawns by regional competitors vying for power. In the past month, I've been able to hear testimonies and stories of pro-democracy movement leaders in Hong Kong. I know many of you are following this closely. These brave men and women, many the age of our students here, they continue to stand up for their freedoms and the freedoms of their family members and neighbors. They're facing police violence and constant threats to their own safety and to their families. But they've continued to bravely speak out. To speak out against mainland China's efforts to erode Hong Kong's democracy and independence. It's for this reason that I believe the United States needs to evaluate its immigration policies towards Hong Kongers. The spirit of 1776 is alive and well in the streets of Hong Kong. You see, protesters are chanting, "Give me liberty" or "Give me death." They're waving the American flag. It's our values. It's those universal values that they covet. If they're not able to realize those dreams in Hong Kong, the United States should give these brave individuals an opportunity here. Their struggles for freedom and the response from Beijing is just emblematic of how the Chinese Communist Party desires to have it both ways. You see, on one hand, China desires integration into global markets and leadership of multilateral organizations. But on the other hand, their pattern of brutal crackdowns on minorities or those who disagree with the Communist Party, their unfair trade practices and their quest for leverage on development partners erodes confidence in the very institutions in which they seek access to power. American leadership has been critical in elevating this challenge. But our farmers and our businesses back here in Indiana and around the country cannot shoulder the burden of correcting these actions on their own, nor should they. Others around the world will benefit from this fight, and I believe a multilateral coalition of nations is necessary to confront China and to bring them into a position of better behavior. Now, to be clear, I don't seek war, I don't seek conflict, I seek the opposite. I seek a global order defined by some semblance of rules. I seek peace, I seek commerce and friendship and prosperity and opportunity for all. But we must ensure that China's entry into leadership positions at the UN or the WTO, or their continued theft of intellectual property, or their use of unethical trade practices, doesn't undermine American interests and values. As many of you know, Fort Wayne is home to one of the largest Burmese diaspora groups in the United States. The suffering of their friends and their relatives back in Burma is heartbreaking and troubling. There's no doubt in my mind that the humanitarian situation in that country is one of the world's worst. In fact, a recent UN report established the Burmese government's, and specifically the Burmese military's, complicity in the effort to terrorize and remove millions of Rohingyas. Their actions rise to the level of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and perhaps even genocide. As my Burmese constituents have passionately explained to me, there's no way for their embattled countrymen to seek redress. After hearing from my constituents, I introduced bipartisan legislation to sanction these military-owned enterprises and other individuals. And I'm working to get that passed right now. In this case and others, I recognize the hesitation that many here in Indiana have about how much America should act. How much of a burden should we bear? It doesn't hurt, though, to place ourselves in their situation. With no internal means of raising grievances, these persecuted groups are at the mercy of malicious leaders. It's for this reason that I welcome attempts by the administration to place sanctions and travel restrictions on Burmese leaders. And this is a small step. It's a small step in the right direction. I hope regional partners will follow suit. I also hope they'll take charge in addressing this ongoing crisis in their own backyard. The United States, as is so frequently articulated these days, cannot intervene in every situation. We can't fight every conflict. We can't solve every problem. We can't even manage every conflict. But our continued leadership on humanitarian issues is vital for two important reasons. First, the United States has the ability to bring immense resources and influence to bear on an issue, almost any given issue. The U.S. possesses a superb logistical network, as well as immense information gathering capabilities to ensure aid is directed where it's most needed. The second reason is that when America is willing to put skin in the game, we remind the world that we are here to stay. We're here to stay. We're going nowhere. The United States will continue to lead in furtherance of these global values, in furtherance of these natural rights we all subscribe to. We remind partners and competitors alike that the United States is willing and able, willing to confront an issue, and able to direct our national resources to confront the issue. This oftentimes inspires others to step up and places bad actors on notice that the United States is on the beat. So with this in mind, I want to thank you for allowing me to offer a few remarks about some hot spots around the world, some of my work on your behalf on the Foreign Relations Committee, some of the meaningful work that each of you give me an opportunity to do on a daily basis. It's important not just globally, but it's important to America, and as I've articulated here, it's important to each of you too. This center's commitment to advocacy and education ensures that Hoosiers will continue to be a leader in promoting good governance, sustainable global leadership, and innovative approaches to solving global problems. And for that reason, I want to once again commend Marian University for the quality of scholarship, for the opportunity to have a presence at these forums, and I thank all of you for your time and attention. With that, I'll take some questions.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Just before we get started with the questions, if you would like to pose a question, there's a microphone at your spot, so you can press the button in front of you and make sure to speak into that so that the senator can hear you, especially from the back. And first, we would hopefully like to get some student questions, and we'll get started. Thanks.
Are you a student?
I'm a teacher.
Ah, okay. I can't turn down a teacher. We love teachers in my house. Really. I got 4 young kids, so I'll take a teacher question, but I'm going to hold out for a student question after that. Yes, miss,
Fair
please.
enough. I liked what you said about universal values, and I really... I liked what you said about universal values, and I really appreciate that. I am pushing the button.
I can repeat what you say, and if anyone feels as though I mischaracterize the question, just raise your hands.
Okay.
Sure. Please.
I think Vladimir Putin's strategy is to undermine portions of countries as a way of achieving control over them. A portion of the Ukraine, a portion of where the Kurds are, a portion of our electoral security. And since you're a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, could you comment on any of those and how
Absolutely.
the United States can press back against those incursions? Because I think we're in big trouble.
Yes. So the question was, in short, in short about Russia and their nefarious activities as it relates to the United States, but really towards the global order, and what the United States should do to address that, correct? So we've seen all sorts of news reports, accurate reports, that the Russians meddled in our elections. Incredibly serious. We've seen the reporting about Russia's revisionist efforts to grab territory. Geopolitics is back. It's no longer the Cold War. Grabbing real estate is once again part of our geopolitics. So the Russians have designs on not just the territory on their border, but they do have that, as we've seen in the Ukraine, but in areas further afield, in the Middle East, for example, in Syria. They have a substantial presence on the ground in Syria, along with the Iranians and the Assad regime and ISIS. Why? Well, some of it is geopolitical calculation. In Syria, for example, the Russians have a warm water port. To the extent that they can keep the Assad regime in power and further entrench themselves there, they regard that as a power base. But I think Putinism is about more than that. I think Vladimir Putin, a former CIA officer, who regarded the greatest tragedy of his own lifetime and probably of generations as the fall of the Soviet Union. Essential to his foreign policy is frustration of the United States' national interests, embarrassment of our leadership, and trying to undermine our democracy. And it's a personal thing, I believe, for Vladimir Putin. It's not just about elevating his own country. It's about Vladimir Putin himself. And so what can we do? That gets to the essence of your question. What should we do? We should push back in every domain. We should provide weapons, as we have, to the Ukrainians. We should secure our own democracy, our electoral system, and through other means against interruption in our electoral process. We should partner with military partners and longstanding allies to resist expansionism into other countries, as we've done with Poland and other NATO countries, and our military rotations in and out of the Baltics. We should stay engaged in the Middle East and prevent the Russians allying themselves with the Turks when we disengage from Syria, which is what just happened hours ago. So, you know, someone like Vladimir Putin will continue to find soft spots in our foreign policy, and use asymmetric means, social media, sending in some military forces who are irregulars, they're not wearing military uniforms, that can create all sorts of mayhem for us, but we have to stay vigilant. Now, in the Foreign Relations Committee, we have imposed, we're probably hitting a point of diminishing returns with respect to the sanctions we've applied on government leaders and oligarchs in Russia. But we've applied just stacks of sanctions. And actually the president is for all the flack that the president has taken with respect to Russia policy, in so many respects this president has not been good for Russia. The number of sanctions that the regime has had to suffer under, it's really hurt the Russian economy. Moreover, we've invested in election security. If you want some, any evidence of that, just look retrospectively at the last election. Many of us were very concerned that our electoral process would again be undermined by the Russians, but there was no talk of that. That's not because there was no attempts to disrupt our election system, but instead, our men and women in uniform, our intelligence community, and our elected officials were all quite vigilant. We need to stay vigilant on the ground with respect to our military presence. And I think we should frankly, be rethinking our military presence that we have all around the world. Afghanistan's the best example. Goodness gracious. Well, we certainly need to come up with some sort of exit strategy there. Get some sense of what victory looks like. But I just don't feel like Russia, based on the information I've been provided, and there wasn't advanced consultation with Congress on this, I don't feel like the disengagement from Syria was wise, and I think it strengthened the hand of the Russians. So I've given you a sampling of the sort of things we should do moving forward, but in conclusion, we just need to stay vigilant. A student. Yes, sir.
Try to get the
Actually, the gentleman's Superman shirt. You're probably all scholars and students, so I'm generalizing.
So I'd like to thank your great efforts to help the Yemeni people. I think that's really important. But I have another unrelated question. When it comes to amendments, have you ever considered, what can be done to strengthen the representation that takes place in Congress, of the people, and also at the same time weed out some of the corruption that's going on in Washington? So what are some amendments that you might be willing to consider or put forward that will strengthen our democracy?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem's not where do I start, the problem is where do I end? So I was really vocal when we had a different president, President Obama, and I was elected in 2010, starting in 2011, about how Congress had sort of resigned itself to an imperial presidency. It's something I'd started talking about before President Obama was president, but no one would ever have any reason to know that, right? So I've remained consistent. James Madison had a real concern when he designed our system of government, and it was that Congress, of the three branches, would be the vortex of power. It would suck up all the power of the federal government, the executive powers, the judicial powers. In fact, Congress can't give away power quickly enough. Right? We don't want to make hard decisions. And that leads to all manner of corruptions and anomalies and injustices. One example is how we've delegated legislative powers to the executive branch. We've delegated incredible powers related to establishment of economic emergencies. Some may disagree with a recent declaration of an emergency, but when you read the statute, Congress delegated a whole lot of power with respect to emergencies. We've delegated on the trade front. The president can essentially determine when trade sanctions need to be applied. It doesn't need to come to Congress. So, you know, I've authored legislation to address each of those things, or co-sponsored legislation to address each of those things. Congress, moreover, if you move outside the foreign policy realm, we pass very vague laws oftentimes. We sort of gloss over the politically difficult decisions, and then we delegate those decisions to our administrative branch, the executive branch, right? And then we come home and we lament the decisions of that bureaucracy, of bureaucrats in Washington. Well, who gave them power? You know, oftentimes it's members of Congress who delegated the power to bureaucrats because we didn't tighten up our legislation enough. So I introduced legislation to address this as well. It's called the REINS Act. It would create a feedback mechanism wherein when any executive agency, whether it's the State Department or Defense Department or Department of Labor promulgates a major regulation, which has been defined in law for a long period of time, then that major regulation would have to come before Congress for an up or down vote, okay, before it could actually take effect. So no member of Congress wants to vote as a standalone measure on a politically sensitive regulation. So this would incentivize members of Congress to actually do their job on the front end. That's just a sampling of some of the sorts of structural changes I think are needed so that all of you can hold people like me accountable for legislating, and so that when I come back and have meetings and answer questions, I can't sort of resignedly just say, well, you know, that's in the hands of the executive branch, which is often, frankly, the case these days. And I'll close this out and talk about, well, maybe we can talk about war powers later. But that's perhaps the most consequential area in which Congress, I think, has given up too much power over the years, and we need to lock that down. But I suspect that will come up. Yeah. I see a student here and a student there, so we'll go with you first, miss. Yes. Can you give me your name and where you're from, please?
My name is Abigail, and I'm from Avon, Indiana.
Fantastic.
I was wondering, do you think that with the trade wars with China, do you think that that will end with the presidency of Donald Trump, or do you think that it will become part of the American culture in the future with a different president?
I commend this president for elevating a long-standing challenge. See, the calculation in 2000, when the United States of America led the charge to welcome a growing China, a modernizing China into the World Trade Organization, believing that if capitalism continued to flourish in China, they would become more democratic, more friendly with the United States. I commend the president for recognizing that that hasn't played out the way we all thought it was going to play out, or so many did at the time. So the Chinese have ripped off our intellectual property. In fact, I challenge anyone here to name a category of significant intellectual property that the United States has developed and China has not yet purloined, the crown jewels. They've stolen almost everything, and they will continue to do so. This was going unaddressed. So this impacts not only the size of our economy and the prosperity of our country and our communities and our families, but ultimately, I mean, if we cease to be the wealthiest country in the world, we'll cease to be the most powerful. We can't defend our values globally. So this is a national security issue and a values issue. This president campaigned on, for the first time a president had done so, addressing this issue. The question is, for me, is, and there's all other ways the Chinese have been running afoul of World Trade Organization rules and the spirit of those rules. They require American businesses to partner with Chinese businesses if they're going to do business in China. They force our businesses to transfer technology. They overproduce certain goods and commodities, sometimes by design, but sometimes just because they're a centrally planned economy and they're not good at balancing supply and demand. So they produce too much of the stuff and they dump it in the United States below cost. These are all anti-competitive practices, and they have to stop. So the real question to get Abigail to, is, in my mind, what should the United States do? Should we continue with this trade war, this trade tit for tat? Well, we shouldn't surrender, because the war was initiated by the Chinese. We just had not yet engaged. So in some form, I think it needs to continue. I don't think that Hoosier farmers, Hoosier workers should disproportionately bear the burden of the world's problems. The French, the British, you name any industrialized economy, they're experiencing the same intellectual property theft and the dumping of goods and so forth. So it's not just targeted at the United States. So rather than bilaterally address this issue, I think we need to do it multilaterally. I just co-sponsored some legislation, the Indo-Pacific Multilateral Initiative or something sounds like that, that would direct the administration to engage in a diplomatic surge on this front. Moreover, for the last couple of years, I've not only been on record talking about this, I've held multiple subcommittee hearings on the Foreign Relations Committee. I happen to oversee a subcommittee that oversees international economic policy. So I've been able to shine a bright light on China's predatory economic practices and elicit from expert witnesses what might be done to address them. I have a firm conviction that we need a plan. We need a short-term, a medium-term, and a long-term national economic security strategy. You can find our national security strategy on the internet right now. It's there for all to see. And derivative of that is a national defense strategy for the Department of Defense. And derivative of the national security strategy is also a national diplomacy and development strategy for our State Department. Well, we need an economic derivative of the national security strategy, a national economic security strategy that deals with things like trade and public investment in frontier technologies and related topics. So we need to work multilaterally through existing institutions, or create a new coalition of willing that can apply more leverage with the Chinese to bring them into a position of better behavior over time. And we need a written plan. China has a plan. You can also find that on the internet. It's available for all to see. So thanks for the question. Yes, sir.
I'm not a student, by the way.
And then we'll go with the lady back there. I'm sorry. Yeah. You're next. Yes.
I know you were talking earlier about terrorism abroad, but I was curious what your policy would be about domestic terrorism and gun violence, especially in schools. Great question.
I just visited with the Noblesville group of parents right before I came here. I sat in the living room of a Noblesville family, and we talked about this very topic. You may recall that Noblesville was a site of domestic terrorism not too long ago. And that traumatized the community. Many of the students and administrators and parents are still somewhat traumatized by that whole episode, and we talked about potential solutions. I think there's consensus that we need to continue to invest in mental health and destigmatize the seeking of mental health services. So that's part of the overall solution. I think there's consensus that we need to consistently ask more of our online platforms like Facebook and Twitter and others with whom I visited as a member of the Commerce Committee, and they're working on their algorithms to sort out, any evidence they might have that young adults or adults are inclined to commit some violent acts and to make authorities aware of those threats. I think there are things we can do with respect to the Second Amendment. Now, we know this is a constitutional right. We know it's not just a federal right, but it's a right that also applies to the states and to individuals within the states. The Supreme Court has spoken very clearly about that, but every right has its limitations, right? So I think Indiana has actually been pioneering some legislation through our emergency protective order or our red flag laws that allow members of law enforcement, when they have sufficient information, to remove firearms from individuals who pose a threat to themselves or to others. I've supported beefed up background checks in the past, and would love to work with the administration to find other ways that we can continue to improve that so-called NICS, National Instant Criminal Background Check System, how we can iteratively improve that system. Third-party or straw purchases. These are currently updated in the ATF database, the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. But these straw purchases can't be monitored if there aren't state and local laws to enforce. So straw purchases are illegal. A straw purchase is when somebody who is legally allowed to purchase a firearm purchases one and then in turn gives it or sells it to someone who should not have that firearm. The Supreme Court has spoken very clearly about that. That is illegal, but it's still occurring, and there's a federal database that is designed to track these things. And state and local laws would be required, however, to enforce illegal straw purchase prohibitions. Those are some of my thoughts. There's many other things we could do, but I think it's going to take a whole of government approach to make sure, we address these things. So when my 4 children go to school in Johnson County, Indiana, they feel safe and secure. So that when all of you go to a Colts game, you feel safe and secure. Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. Oh, yes, sir. You've been very patient. Thank you.
You may, in passing, have answered this question, but is it rational for the United States to remove its armed forces from Syria? I have a Kurdish friend, and what he said to me once makes eminent sense to me now, which is the Kurds have no friends but the mountains. And it seems that despite their help to the United States, they're getting cruel brush off now. Is it rational for the United States to leave Syria?
Yeah, if your primary and singular objective is to incentivize other groups or nations to fight alongside the United States of America in the future, it wouldn't be entirely rational. If part of your objective is to make sure that you maintain a campaign promise that the American people very much valued, that you honor that campaign promise, which is we're going to seek every opportunity to disengage our forces from wars in the Middle East and other places abroad, then that injects a whole lot of rationality into it. So there's a tension there. But am I comfortable with this disengagement? No, I already volunteered to you that I'm not comfortable with it. I remain open to more information, but this dimension to it, this moral dimension, which is they fought alongside us and we've pulled our modicum of forces and maintaining stability in the region out, that troubles me. It also troubles me that this will, at least to some degree, disincentivize others from fighting with us in the future. I hope my candor is well received. Yes, sir.
What, if anything, do you think we need to do to address the budget deficit of the federal government over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, because I got into Congress in 2011, and we've known, by the way, for really generations, that our spending in this country is unsustainable. I mean, the actuaries at the Social Security Department and other government actuaries tell us what we've long known, right? You know, our population is aging. That's a good thing. It's a really good thing, because we figure it out through medical science and nutrition and exercise and so forth. And because of the changing nature of work, how to sustain lives longer. That's a really good thing that we should all celebrate. We've also figured out some incredible medical inventions so that people can not only live longer, but they can live healthier as they live longer. But the cost of medical inflation is going way up, right, if you haven't noticed. It still continues under this national health care law we have. And there's been a lot of disagreement back and forth about how we address that. But so we've got an aging population, and as you age, healthcare costs go up, right? So we know Medicare is really, those costs are spiking. Medicaid costs are also increasing. Now, in part because we've expanded Medicaid, but I could make an argument that's ended up being a good thing. Like HIP 2.0 here in the state of Indiana has made available to more people preventative health services. So you can end up saving money if you invest intelligently on the front end. But if you look at the whole spectrum of things, your medical costs are going up and people are aging. So it's our automatic or autopilot spending programs that are growing at a rapid rate. When I entered office, they, along with interest that we pay on our debt, comprise roughly 2/3 of our federal expenditures. Now again, 2/3 of the money we spend at the federal level is either paying off people who own our treasury bills or notes, or paying for these essential, very popular government programs that we need to keep around, right? And then the remaining third were spent on things that all of us value. Military, infrastructure, education, you know, like the future, all these things. So the trick, we've gone from 2/3 on autopilot to roughly 3/4 of our federal budget. As the population ages, as medical costs continue to go up, and as interest on the debt grows. The trick is to grow the size of our economy and to bring in more revenue while making these programs sustainable. We've done the first part. We've been able to sustain the longest period of economic expansion in American history. At a time we decreased tax rates and reduced the regulatory burden on our businesses, we are now bringing in more revenue to the federal government than we ever have before. It's a pretty underreported piece of news there, but we're bringing in more revenue than we ever have before, but we need to make the rest of the stuff sustainable. And so that's going to take a bipartisan effort, a compromise. And you happen to be staring at someone, yes, I represent Indiana, and I'm one of the more conservative members of the United States Senate, according to some recent rankings. But I was also recently ranked the most bipartisan United States Senator in 25 years. So I'm prepared to act. Now, look, the sample size is 2.5 years or so, but still, you know, I'm prepared to act. I voted to reform these programs. I just need others to join me. But that's what we have to do. Not everyone likes to hear it. There are no hard questions. Yeah. There are no hard answers. You know what the right answer is. Yeah. Sometimes there are hard politics, so.
I think we appreciate you taking on our questions, and we could definitely ask questions, I think, all evening. Yeah. But we're closing in on 8 o'clock, so why don't we have one last short question, and then we'll go on to our reception afterwards, and we'll have students come up for a short picture,
I saw a student back there in the blue shirt, and I like the blue shirt, and so we're going to go with you, sir. You get to close it out. All right.
I appreciate it. Do you have any advice for the younger generation?
Yes.
It's to best maintain and protect some of the values our country was originally founded on that seems to be at risk in today's age.
Yes, I do. And there's a lot of wisdom in this room. I suspect there's some people in this room that are a little older than I am too. So it's with great humility that I volunteer my counsel on this matter. But nonetheless, I think I have an acceptable answer to everyone here. Assess your own personal gifts. Same thing I tell school children when I visit. Same thing I tell my children on a regular basis. You know, we're all given gifts from our God, our Creator. You know, whether you realize it or not. Cultivate those gifts. Work a little bit on your weaknesses. Figure out how you can match your gifts to needs in your community. And you can define your community as your neighborhood, or your town, or your state, or your country, or the world. But make that connection. So, anyone here can serve. The children I talk to can serve. I say, you know, is there a lonely senior citizen who lives next door to you? Why don't you knock on their door, say hello. Your presence is a gift. Go serve, right? Do you love your country enough to die for it? Maybe you think about joining the military. Are you interested in global affairs, and have you educated yourself, you know, on them to a degree in which you think you might enter the foreign service, sacrificing some income, perhaps, to make that sacrifice? Go serve. Do you like teaching? Maybe think about teaching someone who's grew up in much more humble circumstances than you did. Go serve. If business is your thing, make sure you carve out enough time to give back in your local community. Go serve. If you believe deeply in a particular political cause or issue and fear for the future of the country or the world that's going unaddressed, get involved. Invest your time, your resources in a candidate or in a cause that you believe in. Go serve. So I guess my response to all of you, regardless of age, you know, if you're a senior, you feel like you have acquired a life of wisdom or at least the habit of reading, go teach a young child who doesn't know how to read and how to function in a modern society by gaining that valuable skill. Go serve. So that's my message, is just serve. It will make your life so much more rewarding. That should not be the motivation behind it, but I guarantee you that outward focus will bring so much joy and more meaning to your life. Because we do live in a country where oftentimes people are searching for deeper meaning. This can be an impersonal, alienated society. We have a lot of lonely individuals in this country. But when you make common cause with others to improve the life of a community, a state, a nation, or the world, you escape your loneliness, at least for that period of time. That's a beautiful thing. So I'll leave you with that. Serve. Yeah.